afternoon, and welcome to another episode of One Work, Five Questions. Better titled today is One Woman, Five Questions, given our topic is Thomas Jefferson's relationship with a very extraordinary woman, Abigail Adams. And given to us today that we do not focus on any one writing of Jefferson, but on the complete correspondence between Thomas Jefferson and Abigail Adams. I'm your host, George Gorey, formerly a captain with the California Highway Patrol and currently a criminal investigator with the Alameda County District Attorney's Office in the San Francisco Bay Area. Dr. H is a professor of philosophy and history who taught at institutions such as the University of Pittsburgh, University of Michigan, Rowan University, and Rutgers University, Camden. He is the author-editor of over 70 books and nearly 400 published essays, formal and informal, on topics such as ethics, ancient philosophy, science, psychoanalysis, and critical thinking. His current research is on Thomas Jefferson. He is acknowledged by many scholars to be the world's foremost authority and has published over 300 essays, formal and informal, and has 30 books on Thomas Jefferson. He also writes about Ukraine. Colonel Holacek, how are you today?
I'm fine. I stayed up last night and watched your fine video on Thomas Jefferson's West Point Military Academy. So viewers can look up that under The Real Thomas Jefferson. Fine job on that. And I had a couple beverages, and I had the last of your cigars, the ones that you sent me. Very good.
Excellent. Well, let's get into our questions here. We're going to talk a little bit about Abigail Adams. So our first question is, what kind of woman was Abigail Adams? Fiery? Was she pugnacious? Was she strong-willed? What kind of a woman was she?
Yes. I don't know what else to say. That's a tough question to ask me because I'm not a Abigail Adams scholar. I'm not a John Adams scholar. I did finish a book, as you know, on the philosophical correspondence content of the correspondence between Jefferson and John Adams. A wonderful book. It was fun to write. I always know a book's going to be good. Well, almost every book I write is fun in some sense. It's a learning experience for me. But I try to write books that, because I have a lot of ignorance on a certain area and so forth. But anyways, I don't know a lot about her. I only know of her given what I know from her correspondence with Thomas Jefferson and other things I've read about her. I've not read any biography of her. I don't even know if there is a biography of Abigail Adams, but she was a very unusual woman because she was sort of like a woman you might find in Paris in the sense that she was politically savvy. She could talk politics, perhaps with anybody. She could probably talk about a lot of different things. That she was talking about things that mostly about which men tended to talk. So that put her in, in a certain situation. So she would have been fairly comfortable in the Paris scene, hanging around the salons, talking maybe philosophy or world affairs, political affairs. But she also was, as we know, when John Adams was in the Continental Congress arguing for American independence, she was by herself back at their home, taking care of all the affairs on the farm and so forth. So the very, you know from watching the movie 1776 and just reading on this stuff, the women who were left behind by members of the Congress were in a very volatile situation. I mean, the British troops could come in some cases when the soldiers were nearby and destroy the house and things. They were, it was a fearful situation. So she was, as you said, she was fiery, pugnacious, strong-willed. She was highly intelligent. She was stubborn. We're going to learn very, very stubborn. She stuck by her man in thick and thin.
Very much so.
Yeah, and they had a correspondence, I should say, of 99 letters, most of which were written by Abigail, most of which were penned from 1785 to 1788 during Thomas Jefferson's tenure in Paris and John Adams' tenure in London, in England. And so we're going to discuss the correspondence in some detail.
She was a remarkable woman. She was I've never read a biography on her either, but I've read these letters, and I think she's very typical of many New Englanders of the time, very Puritan, very steadfast in her views, and as you said, stood by her man very much so.
Yeah.
So the second question is Jefferson's friendship with Abigail Adams began in France when she cared for his daughter Maria and the slave Sally Hemings when they came to France at Jefferson's insistence. Can you explain this situation?
Well, Abigail Adams met Maria Jefferson, who was called Mary at the time, from June 26th to July 10, 1787, when Thomas asked that Mary be sent over to overseas to on a ship to be with him in Paris because Jefferson had lost his daughter Lucy Elizabeth Jefferson to whooping cough. She was staying. Mary and Lucy Elizabeth were staying at Eppington, the home of Jefferson's brother-in-law Francis Epps, and the children caught the whooping cough disease, and Lucy Elizabeth died. Mary did not, and one of the Epps kids died. And Jefferson just said, "That's enough. She has to come, regardless of any situation. She has to come and be with me. I can't, he was thinking, I can't lose another daughter while I'm here." And so Abigail Adams met with Mary Jefferson, and she was much taken by the beautiful child. And so she got to spend 15 days. And when Mary parted from Abigail, she parted with tears. She wanted to stay with Abigail, and Abigail didn't want to leave her, because she was going to go off and stay at a convent in Paris with her older sister. Uh, so, I mean, that's the situation. So the long and short of it is Abigail forged a strong bond with the child in the matter of 2 weeks or so, and she had difficult parting with the girl.
And then we have the next three and four questions. I know that you're going to kind of answer them together. So I'll start with three. We can segue right into four. Three is, what caused Abigail Adams to break her friendship with Thomas Jefferson?
Thomas Jefferson's break with John Adams. It's that simple. She stood, as we said, she would stand by her man. And when Jefferson, during Adams' first administration, sort of broke politically with John Adams, and it was a break that was reinvented. It was confirmed, I want to say, it's not quite the word I want, but it was reinforced. The break was reinforced by Adams' appointment of Federalist judges, just prior to leaving the presidency when Jefferson became president in 1801. March 1801, he appointed a bunch of Federalist judges, knowing he's going to lose the Congress to the Republicans, and the presidency is going to Republicans. So he had these midnight appointments, and Jefferson was not fond of the Alien Sedition Acts as well prior to that during the Adams administration. So there's some real stark political differences. And I mean, that's enough to answer the third question. What are you doing?
Abigail supported her husband. And Abigail obviously supported her husband's politics on that as well. She was a Federalist by nature as well. And so I guess that segues into question four, which I think is really probably the most important, in my own opinion. After the death of Jefferson's daughter Maria in 1804, Abigail writes a condolence letter to Jefferson regarding her death. What is unique about this letter?
What's unique is that my dumb dog is on my lap again. Now he just jumped off. Okay, talking about the letter. Yeah, Mary, now Maria, she gets that name at Jefferson's in France, dies, and Abigail learns of it. She dies in 1804, and Abigail learns of it from the newspaper, and it brings back all the fond memories she had of Maria Jefferson. And she probably, I'm sure, cried. She writes, I'll give you some snippets from the letter. It says, "You have been no other than the private inhabitant. Had you been no other than the private inhabitant of Monticello, I should ere this time have addressed you with that sympathy which a recent event had awakened in my bosom. But reasons of various kind withheld my pen until the powerful feelings of my heart have burst through the restraint and called upon me to shed the tear of sorrow over the departed remains of your beloved and deserving daughter, an event which I sincerely mourn." So the death of Maria Jefferson really tugged at Abigail's heart. But she ends the letter. Look how she ends the letter. She goes, "A firm belief in the being, perfections, and attributes of God is the sincere and ardent wish of her," talking about herself, "who once took pleasure in considering herself your friend." I mean, she's just, "I'm not your friend anymore. I'm going to write to you Basically, I'm sorry your daughter died. I loved your daughter dearly, but you're not my friend. That's it. Now,
Quite
Jefferson
direct.
is sort of astonished at this. I mean, they haven't written for quite some time, right? Since Adams, I think it's 1788, and then gets this letter in 1804. So it's been quite a long time since there's any correspondence between the two. And Jefferson says, I can say with truth that one act of Mr. Adams' life, and only one, ever gave me a moment's personal displeasure. I did consider his last appointments to office as personally unkind. They were from among the most ardent political enemies, from whom no faithful cooperation could ever be expected, and laid me under the embarrassment of acting through men whose views were to defeat mine, or to encounter the odium of putting others in their places, right? He's bitching about the midnight appointments. And he says that Adams had really no right to do that. He was leaving office. And so he appoints these Federalist judges to inflate the number of Federalists in the judiciary. And so he's not happy about that. He lets Abigail know that. But he says, I forgave it cordially and returned to the same state of esteem and respect for him which had so long subsisted. So he mentions he's just letting his feelings be known. Yeah, that happened. That one act bothered me, but I forgave him. Right. And Adams is Abigail's probably thinking, well, if you forgave him, why do you have to write about it? Or now, you might forgive him. I'm not going to forgive you. She comes back on August 18, 1804. She goes, you exculpate yourself, you free from blame, from any intentional act of unkindness towards anyone. She says anyone. Basically, every time someone blames you for something, you free yourself, you exculpate yourself from any sort of blame. I will freely state that which I referred to my former letter, which I could not avoid considering as personal resentment. And she mentions a couple problems here. One is the calendar problem, James Calendar problem, that Calendar was noted for slandering George Washington, for slandering the Federalists and John Adams among them. And in a prior letter, she talks about how that bothered her quite a bit. And Jefferson comes back and says, well, the calendar issue was a matter of the sedition acts. Calendar, as well as a number of other people, almost all of whom were Republicans, were thrown in jail by the Adams administration for speaking out against the Adams administration. And Jefferson says, well, I freed not only Calendar, but I freed anyone who was thrown in jail. I didn't ask the reasons. I freed them. That's all. And, she'll have none of it. But then she says, but there's, she mentions in this prior letter another reason. And she says, it's something I don't have to tell you. And Jefferson comes back and says, no, I don't. You do have to tell me. And so she comes up in this letter on August 18th. She said, soon after my eldest son's return from Europe, he was appointed by the district judge to an office into which no political concerns entered. In other words, nonpartisan. Personally known to you and possessed all the qualifications, you yourself being judge, which you had designated for office. As soon as Congress gave the appointments to the president, you removed him. You did it, Thomas. So particularly this looked so particularly pointed that some of your best friends in Boston at the time expressed their regret that you had done so. I must do him the justice to say that I never heard an expression from him of censure or disrespect towards you in consequence of it. With pleasure, I say that he is not a blind follower of any party. You remove my son, John Quincy, and John Quincy would not be a Federalist when he becomes president. And she blames Thomas Jefferson specifically, and Jefferson, had known. He comes back on September 11th, not quite a month. There were no planes flying into buildings at the time,
right?
In 1804. And Jefferson says, I didn't know anything about it. I was just removing judges. And he was sort of compelled by the hardcore Republicans to remove as many Federalists as he could. And Jefferson does not want to remove all the appointments if a person was qualified, or, he was doing what he could to placate the hardcore Republicans, as well as to seek justice for This was an act he thought was deemed radically unjust. Uh, Adams comes back on October 25, 1804, and says basically to Thomas, our political differences are just too stark. And she says, this marks, I quote from her, the close of this correspondence. I'm not writing you. Don't write to me anymore. That's it, Thomas. I'm done with you. She's a very strong-minded person, right? Remember the other letter she said, you're not my friend. I might have some, she says in one letter, I'm writing to you basically because my feelings are still there, but my reason hasn't caught up with my feelings and overturned my feelings. But she said, now it has happened. So I'm not your friend. And now she says, I'm not only not your friend, don't write to me anymore. That's in October 25, 1804. What do you think about that? Talk about
I think that she, it comes back to a couple things. She is a Puritan, a very, without knowing her, seems like a very, very principled person. She was a Federalist like her husband. They're from New England. New Englanders are much more for this kind of the law and order mentality.
black and
Not that the
white.
Sedition Act was, yeah, black, and not that the Sedition Act was law and order. It was obviously a violation of the Constitution. But I mean, she obviously viewed it the same way her husband did. And then she was also a good wife. She loved him, John, and she did see it as a personal assault. And I think probably natural to some degree to assume that Jefferson bankrolled Callender, even though I don't believe he did, or that he set Callender up to attack Adams. And so I think that you have this fiery person, black and white thinker, very religious person, very pugnacious, very confrontational. And probably ran the Adams household, I would assume. And she wasn't having any of it. And I do find it seems like to me, a little personally unkind that she included that comment in a condolence letter, you know, where she said she's not his friend.
Yeah, that's
She
strange.
seems
It's something your Jefferson is in need of some sort of condolence, and yet she's got to come back. I'm not your friend, by the way. She's got to add that at the end of
yeah, it's
that.
pretty rough.
Yeah,
Pretty rough.
it's pretty rude when you think about it. You
Yes.
mentioned that. I think about that. Um, as I told you prior to going on the air, I said I'm thinking of doing a book on the complete correspondence, the 99 letters shared between Abigail and John. I'm working on the Declaration of Independence now. That's going to take a while. I've got a book on Ukraine I'm doing as well. Always got too many things going on at once. That's how I function. But I mean, there's a lot to say here. I've never really, in any of my books, I talk about the Callender affair, and I've never gone into great detail in any of my books, and that needs to be done. We'll have to do a show on that, you and I, a long one.
Oh, yeah. That'd make a great show.
Yeah, I mean, because there's some sense in which Callender is actually at some point when he's attacking, Adams and the Federalists, he's doing some of Jefferson's dirty work, and Jefferson, let's not give him all the credit. I mean, he wants, he always bids Madison and other people take up your pen and argue against
Right.
Hamilton
Yeah.
and these other Federalists. Jefferson, claims, well, I've never written anything, and he hasn't, but he's encouraged other people to do so. So he's involved in this political intrigue, and he does pay Callender $50.
He does.
Probably. It's clear to me. It seems that Callender's doing some of his dirty work, so he might. And Callender needs money, and he calls Callender a genius, meaning not what we mean today. It means he's an intellectual, and he's got Republican sympathies. And if he's going to write on that, if the guy needs help, I'll give him some money. Yeah, he'll help us out. He'll help the Republican cause. That all. So I mean, in a book on Abigail, I'd have to talk all about that. I'd have to talk about the Alien Sedition Acts, and I'd have to talk about the midnight appointments, all of which I've talked about in other works, but I have to go into great detail. So it might be really interesting to do something.
I think so.
It.
And I think that, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying I'd learn a lot more about her than I know now. I can't really answer your first question. I couldn't.
Yeah. And I think that she was a good person, but I think she was one of these people, like you said, very black and white thinker. My mom's family is from New England, and they're great people, but many of them are still very much like the Adamses, the people of that time, right? It's a certain construct, a Puritan outlook, a certain way of looking at life, right? A certain temperament, so to speak, like the North and the South in the Civil War.
Yeah, it really is. It's good that you bring that up, that the puritanical aspect, because it's certainly there in the Adams. Adams always attended mass and so forth. unlike Jefferson, everybody talks of him being, especially in his correspondence with Madison, being pie in the sky and his feet are not on the ground. But Jefferson can see the nuances of scenarios where Adams really couldn't. Adams wanted things to be done a certain way, and saw things, as we said, black and white. And when he didn't get his way, he pouted and he got angry and so forth. And Abigail is sort of like that. She's pouty as well, and she's going to hold a grudge. Jefferson just thinks, anger is a waste, like I do. I think anger is just a silly waste of time. You're going to sit there and brood, and blood pressure goes up, your face gets red, and what's the point? If you can't solve a situation.
It's better sometimes to turn whatever anger is into work or into effort, right?
Yeah. Well, what did
rather than
Jefferson
let it
say
spoil
in
you.
his 10 principles, in another letter, 12
Yeah.
principles, code conducts of life? He said, when angry, count to 10. When very angry, count to n hundred. And that's entirely right from the Stoics. I mean, Seneca writes a book on anger, not an essay, a book on anger. I think there are 3 books in the book that he writes, and talks about the stupidity of anger and how anger is entirely in our control. I was reading that again, and very, very fascinating essay. And I think the argument is good. And I think Jefferson was very much influenced by Seneca and the Stoics and people like that. And he didn't see the point of, as we'll talk about anger at some point, but I think I can only know of about 2 situations where Jefferson genuinely got angry. Maybe that would be good for one of the vignettes.
I think so. And I think I think with Abigail too, I think he was a little surprised at how angry she was. I mean, because like you said in the condolence letter, you include this thing where I'm not your friend anymore. I mean, that's not only rude, it's pretty angry. I mean, because that would take an awful lot of anger in somebody to say that in a condolence letter. I mean, you
In a condolence,
juxtapose
and
the
notice
two
Jefferson
in a
doesn't do
condolence
that.
letter.
Jefferson doesn't return the anger.
No,
He
he
doesn't know
doesn't.
what to do, but he doesn't write back to her. It's just, at some point he realizes, you talked about some of your work and some of the lunatics
Yeah,
uh, that you are with whom you're engaged. You see some of the deeds that people do, murders and the poor treatment of children and so forth, and you scratch your head. And at some point, we talked about this. At some point, you walk away from these people because they're not going to be rehabilitated. They're just too corrupt, too screwed up for too long a period of time. I think that's why Jefferson sort
unreachable.
of, yeah, that's how, hey, my squirrel is eating the peanuts I put out there. He had to break to
Oh,
get my
good.
squirrel. He was looking straight at me like this, like, where are my peanuts? And I bought him specifically yesterday. So he's out there. He just looked right through the screen and
He's
gave
having a
me
good
that
meal.
look. I had to break off. We were gonna film until the squirrel showed up, but we had to stop. Where was I going with this? I mean, so Abigail really, she holds a grudge, and that's probably a
Clearly, yeah,
very northern thing to do,
I think so.
as opposed,
Temperament.
yeah, southern. Well, they had duels too in the South, and all, code of honor and all that stuff. I don't think Southern people were angry, but they did hold grudges. It
Oh
just,
yeah.
and they
Well,
saw it. I don't think it was part of the Southern Code. My Abbeville friends might correct me on this, but I think part of part of the Southern Code was not so much to get angered, but to get retribution. So if you soil my name, we're going to duel. you
look
know,
at Jefferson and John Marshall.
yeah.
Personal dislike for their entire lives. Politically, very different. Temperament, it sounds like very different. Um, and it just goes to show you, right, that it has a lot to do with people's dealing with their problems. Like in this case with Abigail, it's not in her nature to probably be very forgiving. That's how I
No,
read it. I mean,
and you brought up John Marshall. That I talked about Jefferson and Hamilton, uh, and other people with whom he's supposed to hate, right? Patrick Henry is another example. When I've studied what Jefferson says about Hamilton and Henry, there's no hatred there. Jefferson is highly critical of these people, but he doesn't hate them. He doesn't like what they say, or he's very critical, and he's very accurate. It might be different with John Marshall. That's
yeah,
someone, Marshall would just, he delighted in just messing with Jefferson's head as much as he could. And I haven't done enough research on that, but I think Marshall might be an exception. I don't know. You brought that up, so
I think he considered when he's talking about to Abigail about some of his ardent political enemies, he considers Marshall as I think that main one because Marshall was appointed by Adams, and he was his most ardent opponent, and he was a high Federalist. He changed the role of the Supreme Court forever. I mean, so I think that
yeah.
I'm assuming that's one of the people he was referring to.
Oh, I'm
You
sure.
know,
I mean, yeah, you mentioned about how Jefferson always thought we're getting a little off script, but it's interesting off script that no one branch of the government, the Congress or the executive or the judiciary, should have sole say in interpreting the Constitution. And Marshall turned that around, where the judiciary was the sole exclusive
sole
office that
arbiter. Yeah,
was a final arbiter, and he just hated that, and I think with good reason. And he hated, of course, the fact that judges would be life appointed, right? And that just is a
it's a
blueprint
recipe for
for.
it's a recipe for despotism. You know, really.
Absolutely right. Yeah, it is. Unless you have really virtuous people on there, but still, it's hard to anyway. But you're right. I
Well, let
mean,
me ask. I
yeah,
mean, I think that was part of his anger, right? And that's why he refers to that as ardent political enemies. I think Samuel Chase was another one who hated Jefferson with a passion,
yeah,
who was appointed, and these folks really derailed. Well, not derailed, but they attempted to derail his agenda. So of course he's very angry at Adams. I mean, I would be angry too. I
yeah.
mean, and I think Abigail didn't see it that way, obviously. No, I mean,
Yeah,
her husband is the
and we
president.
talk about derail. I'll make this comment. We can get on the last question. But I mean, I make the point that Jefferson, like you talk about in your military academy thing, make the point that Jefferson is always looking at things from this philosophical perspective. That when he's talking about life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, these are philosophical principles that any just government should have. So anybody wants to come up with any kind of constitution whatsoever, any government by an executive government by the rule of one, a king or something, you know, there have to be these rights that are guaranteed. And these are just philosophical principles that need to be wedded into any constitution, any form of government one might envisage, unless, if not, it's going to be a corrupt government. So, as we talked about, Jefferson, when he's arguing politically against these people, it's not political for him. It's a philosophical argument, and the other people are arguing
Exactly.
politically. So they're never going to see eye to eye. Jefferson is at this level here, and his opponents are at the lower level, just thinking that these are just political differences. Jefferson is arguing for philosophical differences.
Yeah, deep philosophical differences as opposed to surface political ideology. And as you said, our last question is, did Abigail Adams and Thomas Jefferson ever reconcile? And if so, how so?
They did. Again, you asked the question, how did they break? They broke when John Adams broke with Jefferson during his presidency. And how did they get back together? They reconciled when John Adams and Thomas Jefferson reconciled, in a manner of speaking. At least we can draw that inference, I think, with a great deal of accuracy. Um, the Now, John Adams and Jefferson reconciled on January 1, 1812, with the arbitration, as it were, to use that term, of Dr. Benjamin Rush, who got the two together. And that one of the, man, if that never happened, boy, I mean, I said I just wrote a book on Jefferson and John Adams, and their philosophical correspondence was principally in the retirement years. That is such a rich correspondence. If they never had gotten back together, if Rush did not intervene, what a loss for posterity.
Sure.
The minds of these two large lions, Adams and Jefferson, we'd never have their thoughts engaging in this conversation. Really, to me, as a philosopher, I just think it's so cool.
Their letters are brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah, they are. And we'll talk about some point when I get my book published. It's finished, and I really like the book. It's kind of fun to write, as I said. Now, so she, after Jefferson and John reconcile, he writes, Adams is writing a letter to Jefferson, and it's July 15, 1813. And Abigail, right? I don't have any props here, do I? It's a marker, but it's not a pen. He scribbles something beneath the letter, just to say hi to Thomas Jefferson, basically Jefferson replies on August 22, 1813. Um, so she writes something on July 15th. He responds over a month later on August 22, 1813. I'm not going to read any of it. It's a very friendly letter. It's cordial, and Jefferson is walking on eggshells in this letter. It's funny. He recognizes Abigail's volatility. That if he says the wrong thing again, she'll come back with something sharp and say, "I'm not talking to you again." End of correspondence. So he doesn't. It's a very pleasant letter. Um, and written rather wisely. And then the last letter between the two is September 20, 1813. It's Abigail writing to Thomas Jefferson. She loses her daughter, whom she called Nabby. Nabby had breast cancer.
Nabby.
Nabby, and she dies. And I was thinking about this. She writes, although time has changed the outward form and political back-wounding calumny that comes from Shakespeare, for a period interrupted, the friendly intercourse and harmony which subsisted, it is again renewed, purified from the dross. Very beautifully written. It's an instance of a big word called febration, of purification, purifying. The friendship that she uses the word purify, it's a strong word. It shows that all the enmity, all the hatred, when something's purified, when something's feberated, the dross is gone. Everything is pure. Everything is good again. It's like the Catholics in confession. We're all good again. Get ready to sin again.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I'm good to go. Picking on you Catholics. We love you. You know that. So, I mean, here's a question for you. I'm just playing around here. It's surmise, complete surmise. Nabby dies in 1813, September, and Mary dies in 1804. Does Abigail, and you can't answer this with any accuracy, does Abigail think in some sense, going back to the Puritan nature, I don't know what and she believes in God like Adams does. Does she think God is punishing her by taking her daughter like he took Jefferson's daughter for the hatred that, I mean, it's something to think about, that she's been hating Jefferson for all these years and I'm not going to be your friend. Then she loses her daughter like Jefferson. Is it a matter of God punishing her, or is it just a matter of, look, I felt the loss of Mary. Now I understand what it's like because I lost my daughter. So, I mean, there's
It's hard to
something.
answer. I think it could be both. I mean, it could be one or the other or both. I mean, I
Could be
thought of the
both.
same thing. You lose a child, right? She's lost her child now. Now she's going through the pain that obviously he went through of losing his daughter. Probably what most psychologists and most people will tell you is probably the greatest loss you can suffer in your life.
Yeah. I went to a funeral where a friend of mine passed away. His name was David. I won't go talk about last names and all that. I doubt that anybody in their family's watching the show to speak from probabilities. But his mother, at the funeral, I was with her, and then a minister came up and she said to me, parents should go before their children. And I said, you're right.
That's
And
absolutely
she said, it's
thought.
just not right. And the minister butted in and said, but you don't understand the ways of the Almighty. And she did not want to hear that. And I completely understand. It's just, it might be for a religionist an appropriate answer, but it wasn't the right thing to say at the time. Let her, it's a very reasonable sentiment. If you have children, I want to die before my children die. I don't want to have to see them die. Very reasonable.
Here's the thing. When you look at Abigail and you look at her Puritan belief system, right? She was obviously a devoutly religious woman. Adams was too, but as I think you saw in his writings, he was also a Unitarian, I believe,
Yeah.
in a more conservative sense. But I think that, with a lot of people who, and my relatives are from New England, they're Catholics, but they're from New England. There's a sense of fatalism, right, in Puritanism, like, of God's
Sure.
punishment and being judged. And I think I could see in this case where she might think to herself, am I paying the price for what I said to him in a sense is God returning this favor to me, not favor, but this punishment on
This
me that I'm
this
losing my daughter.
disfavor.
Yeah, this disfavor that he's my daughter's being taken. But I think also, she sounds like she was a good and decent woman as well. I think
Sure.
that there's a lot of it probably is her own compassion and sympathy now that she's feeling the pain of losing her daughter. She understands, I think, at a level what he went through.
Yeah.
And this is her kind of way of apologizing, not apologizing, but reconciling with him
Yeah, and it might be apologizing. It's just a very
in a sense. Yeah,
she's one thing we know what this exchange shows, and we can say she's a very passionate woman. And
absolutely.
she is, as we say today in poker terms, she's all in. If she's going to invest
Right.
in her man, John Adams, she's all in on it.
She's very devoted to
Absolutely.
him.
And she, what a wonderful partner she would have been for him. And what a rock. I mean, I want to learn more about her. I mean, she's a fascinating woman. So part of the reason wanting to do this book is to learn more about her. She's one of the two ladies so far I've written about in Jefferson's day. One is Maria Cosway, and I finished a book on that. It's a wonderful book, maybe the best book I've ever done, because I really was taken in by Maria. I'm somewhat taken in by Abigail as well. I want to learn more about her. She's, like I said, she's passionate, she's intelligent, she's all in. She was not your typical American female, was she?
No, no, not at all. No.
So, do
And
you
I
have
think
any?
she was also very outspoken.
Yeah, and women weren't supposed to be that. Jefferson's wife, Martha, was nothing like that from what we could gather.
No.
Do you have any final words on this before we talk about next
No,
week?
I think it was well, what I would say is I think this was really a great topic to cover because I do think that the exchange is important in the sense that it covers a little bit of the political differences, but I think what makes it most important, it covers the clash of humanity, so to speak, when people have political difference and how they turn into personal ones, and how you're really seeing a view into Jefferson trying to explain himself to her, and you're seeing this really tough, smart, really intelligent woman who, to her credit, is standing by her man. She's a little insulting in the letters,
Well,
but you
so
really
is
see a great
John.
exchange. Yeah, and you see a real exchange between two great people, um, and obviously her not at her best. When
And
she
she
makes that
stands
remark.
up to Jefferson. She's not afraid of saying what
No,
she wants to say. As a typical, Jeffersonian Virginian woman is not supposed to be doing that, and she doesn't care if
I don't
she
care what
sees
he
Jefferson.
thinks.
Yeah, she's sort of in your face and stuff. All
And
right,
I think that
George.
it's
I encourage viewers to follow his video on the West Point Academy, which was put up yesterday. Very well done for your first. So congrats
thank
on
you. And
that.
thank you for your help. It was great.
Yeah, I don't know how much I helped. I made some comments that probably as reasonable as the edits of Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. Probably looking at him, Polachek, what the fuck are you doing here, cutting this out and that out?
It was it was a labor of love, though. I enjoyed doing it.
Good, and it was very informative. I mean, I learned stuff from it that I didn't know. What are we doing next week? Before we say
Next week,
goodbye.
we have a special episode of our philosophical conversations with Thomas Jefferson. We're going to take a bird's eye look at Jefferson's Notes on Virginia, probably one of the most important works ever written in American literature. Just how significant was the book to early American literature? We're going to have Dr. Holochuk tell us that and tell us what the book tells us about Thomas Jefferson.
Well, great. I have a book on that. It's a commentary on. I was just going to do the Notes on Virginia with a commentary, but that was too long. It just was a commentary, and I really enjoyed writing the book, and we'll talk about that next week. So thanks for sharing this with us, George, Captain,
Of course.
and we'll do
Thank
this
you.
again. We'll do this again next week, as I say in my customary way of signing off. TTFN, ta ta for now. And
TTFN.
yep.
See you, Colonel. Thank you.